Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Managing Mental Health at Work. My name is Nicole Mormillo, ILR class of 2012, and I'm the president of the ILR Alumni Association, also known as the ILRAA. Today's session honors Mental Health Awareness Month and is the last of the ILRAA's Career Transition Initiative. This initiative has supported alumni who are re-entering the workforce, navigating a layoff, or pivoting in their career by hosting a series of webinars since February on various subjects like job search with recruiting firms, personal branding, navigating workplace conflicts, and understanding severance and employment agreements. We also offered complimentary headshots across 6 cities. We recently partnered with Cornell Alumni Career Programs to broaden the reach of our webinars. They provide career-focused resources, learning opportunities, events, and a monthly alumni newsletter, and they manage the CUE Links networking platform. We'll be regrouping over the summer and plan to return with more valuable career transition webinars in the fall. I welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat, use the reaction buttons at the bottom of your screen to interact during today's session, and encourage you to ask questions through the Q&A feature, which we'll cover at the end of the session with questions previously submitted with registration. Please note that this webinar is recorded and will be shared via email after the session. Finally, Cornell staff is online to assist with any tech needs. I'm thrilled to now introduce our panelists for today. First, our moderator is Lisa A. Stern, ILR class of 1981, and an attorney at Robert A. Rombrough, PA. Our panelists, first we have Erica Ozer, ILR class of 1994, and an executive director and senior associate general counsel at BCG. Finally, we have Joan Swadron Friedman, PhD, ILR class of 1981, and a clinical psychologist and executive coach. Lisa, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Hi, everybody. As Nicole mentioned, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so it's great that we're having more conversations around mental health. Joan, why is this such and Erica, why is this such an important topic in today's workplace?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it is critical. Nearly 20% of adults in the US have a mental health condition, and only about half of those people seek treatment. So one of the goals of Mental Health Awareness Month is to have these very conversations. So a big shout out to Nicole and everyone at Cornell for giving us this opportunity to have this conversation today. It's all about raising awareness, talking about treatment options and reducing the stigma that's associated with mental illness, because oftentimes it's that very stigma that keeps us from seeking the treatment we need. But as to why it's important in the workplace, I think the pandemic brought a lot of these issues to the forefront, the collective trauma that we were all experiencing. Workforce demographics is another factor. Today's younger workers place a high value on their mental health and wellness, so shout out to younger workers. And according to a recent survey from the American Psychological Association, 81% of workers look for employers who actively support their mental health. So employers know they need to pay attention to this. They are paying attention to this. And we know that workplace wellness leads to better employee engagement, motivation, satisfaction, lower turnover, overall productivity, improvements in risk management, reduction in claims and grievances, and an overall cost savings between healthcare costs, recruiting, turnover, workplace accidents. In the US alone, these costs are estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So pretty compelling reasons for employers to pay attention to it. And, to borrow a trope, we're ILR. Of course, we know that workplace wellness is essential for an organization's success.
The workplace has really changed and in particular over the past several years. Erica, can you highlight some things that you've noticed that have changed in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I would say is the most notable changes really center around alignment personal life and work life being completely blurred. And I think that's manifested in several different ways. So what I would say is how we work. We now often work in pajamas or yoga pants. We work at the kitchen table. There really is no start or end time to our workday. And our personal phone, for many of us, has become our work phone. Technology has also increased at rapid pace. And we are having messages come at us from all avenues while we're working. So we are instant messaging, we're texting, we're emailing, we're WhatsApping, we're Microsoft Teaming, and posting things on LinkedIn all at the same time. Because of that rapid pace of technology, our expectations at work have gotten much higher in terms of how fast we're all going to respond, leaving really not a lot of ability for us to take a break in the evening or on weekends because of that fast response time expectation. What I've also noticed is most companies have really globalized. That means you're working with teams that are all around the world, which is an amazing experience, but at the same time, you have time zone obstacles. That means that, again, blurring those lines, because in order to take a call with Singapore and Europe, you're either doing that in the middle of the night or at crack of dawn. So that also has put some obstacles on our ability to get some breaks in our day. Meeting culture has also increased tremendously. And Zoom fatigue is a real thing that I myself have experienced. And also the workplace is just much more informal. What employees wear to work, the fact that you're texting your boss instead of writing a memo, emojis are somewhere mixed in throughout your day. That's a very different work environment than what we saw maybe just a few years ago. And then one upside is I do think some of the stigma around flexibility, needing flexibility, wanting flexibility has actually gone down in some ways. And I think that's actually a very positive trend that I have noticed.
Great. Joan, for those individuals re-entering the workforce, we assume it is quite natural to feel anxiety around it. What are some things people can do to ensure a smooth transition as they re-enter the workforce?
Sure. It's absolutely normal to feel anxious when you're starting a new job or re-entering the workforce, and that anxiety might even be heightened if you've been out of the workforce for any period of time. But there are lots of things you can do, in preparation for returning, in the early days of starting a new job, and then just ongoing as you're onboarding and continuing throughout your career. I think first in preparation is to really lean into your strengths. If you've been in interview mode, chances are your strengths, your skills, your accomplishments, those are all top of mind. So remind yourself that you're a rock star. And then on the flip side, be honest about any knowledge gaps. So where might you need to fill in? Are there any online courses you should be taking? Are you proficient in all of the, the software, the platform, the tools that your new employer uses? And then reflect on any feedback you've gotten over the years from colleagues or supervisors, and ask yourself, how can I be even more effective in the role? I think in the early days, you really want to be clear about the expectations. So have those conversations with your boss, maybe with HR, clarify roles, responsibilities, know the KPIs you're going to be evaluated on. Where can you make the biggest contribution? What's keeping your boss up at night? I like to ask a lot of questions. I think that's really your superpower in the early days. If you remember Harry Potter and the cloak of invisibility, you have the cloak of questions in those early weeks and months. So lean into that. And then you really want to be intentional about connecting with your team and other key players. in the organization. This is not only going to make you feel more comfortable and more integrated, but when you're an individual contributor or when you're, just starting out, it's not just about how hard you work. Your success is predicated on how well you work with others. So you really want to identify, like, who are the people you can go to and what are the relationships you need to build. And then ongoing, and this isn't just for a career transition, but good self-care is so important. Mom was right. She always is. Take care of the basics, get a good night's sleep, eat healthy, exercise, get outside and play, add some mindfulness practice, yoga, meditation. These are all elements that we call lifestyle medicine. How you live makes a big impact on your physical health and your mental health. But then one last point is a tool that we call Name It to Tame It. And it's a great tool for managing anxiety or really any distressing emotion. So, when you can identify what you're struggling with, rather than trying to ignore it, when you can lean into that discomfort, paradoxically, it actually helps to decrease the intensity. So imagine a scenario. It's Monday morning. You're in the kitchen having coffee, and you say to your partner, I have my first big presentation this week. I'm really anxious about it. And he says, don't worry, you're going to be great. Let me know if there's anything I can do to support you. Versus that same scenario, spouse comes down to the kitchen and you say, am I the only one in this house who knows how to unload a dishwasher? Like, we've all done that. We've all unleashed. But when you can identify the feeling, when you can name it to tame it, it's much better for everyone. So these will all help set you up for success.
Great. Work-life balance seems to have become elusive. It's more of an aspirational goal these days. Joan, can you talk about the role that work-life balance plays in mental health? And to that end, I'm just going to give you one story in my area, in that I live in a neighborhood when we all went to COVID, and a lot of us are still working remotely. To create that work-life balance, we created a dog walking time in the middle of the day.
Love
so
that.
everyone took a break to step back from their work and kind of go outside, enjoy nature, interact with other people. At the beginning was socially distant, now it's closer, and spend time with our pets. So how can you guide us in this area?
Sure. And I think, Erica, you broached that earlier when you talked about, there's no longer that separation between church and state, and we're on all the time. And that really is, a challenge. It's great to take a phone call while you're, chopping some vegetables for dinner. But when I think about work-life balance, I think about setting boundaries, managing your time, and prioritizing well-being. So this is especially challenging today when I hear a lot of organizations, talking about, play like a champion and play like an Olympian, which is great, but even professional athletes have an off season. When you're a corporate athlete, it's always game on. But, I think in terms of setting boundaries, if you can, I say strive for defined work hours, disconnect from technology, don't bring the phone to the dinner table, punch out for the day. Cultivate presence, be here now. If you're at work, be at work. If you're at home, be at home. And then remind yourself that you're a whole person. Schedule for the things that connect you to you, that give you pleasure, interests, hobbies, time with loved ones. You can always replace your job. You can't always replace your family. So that's one. I think, clearly time management is important. I like to think about it in terms of time investment. Treat your time like you treat your money and invest it wisely, because it's one asset that once it's spent, you never get back. So you really want to prioritize, focus on what's essential, where will you make the most impact, where will you get the most return, and don't be afraid to say no. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Delegate when possible. If you're an individual contributor or more junior, ask your boss to help you triage. If you go to your boss and say, I know this new project is a priority, but I'm concerned about my other deliverables. Can you help me, reprioritize? Your boss will love you for that. And then again, prioritize well-being, those lifestyle fundamentals. But one last note that I need to mention here, because I see this both in my therapy practice, in my coaching practice, and I see it with very driven, successful people, probably like everyone who's with us today. It's hard to separate our worth from our work. I'm going to say that again. It's hard to separate our worth from our work. Now, granted, I believe me, I take work very seriously. I grew up in a family business, probably part of the reason why I went to ILR. And, granted, there are no doubt legitimate demands that come from the external world, but there are also internal demands that we place on ourselves. So when you have those external demands and those internal demands joining forces, it's a perfect storm. So this is where you really have to challenge yourself and ask, where is this pressure coming from? How much of this is coming from me? How much is self-imposed? And what am I willing to let go of? So, and of course, this goes without saying, seek support if you need it. If you're really struggling with something, reach out to friends, family, mental health professionals. It's not a weakness to ask for help. It's actually a strength.
Erica, what are some of the best practices that you recommend to achieve a better work-life balance?
Yeah, so maybe before I get into the best practices, I actually think it's really important to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And I know that at different times in our lives, we may need different things. And what I mean by that is, is it really important that you have what I'm calling work-life balance, where it really is an end and start time, because you have other commitments that cannot be blurred? And I think that's an important question, because not every job can be work-life balance. I actually think of it as work-life integration. A lot of jobs, you're just never going to have that work-life balance. And you have to be okay with that. And maybe at some point in your life, you're not okay with it. And maybe at other points in your life, you are. What I can tell you is, if it is a job that you're going for, and you are okay with the fact that it's work-life integration, then I think it's all about what kind of control you can, where do you have control to control things, and where do you not? And it's never going to be perfect. And I think you have to recognize that, but you can do all the things that you can do to be in control as best you can. And there, what I would say is, Joan brought up self-care. I cannot tell you how important that is, and how important it is, even each day, to practice some sort of self-care, even if it's only 5 minutes. I had a leader who used to say, and I thought it was such good advice, you have to put your own oxygen mask on before you can help anyone else. And that is at work, in life. You can only be a better parent, a better worker, a better family member, a better friend, when you do take some time to take care of yourself. So that is just best practice number one. Also, setting boundaries. I know we've brought this up before. Even if it's as simple as going outside, walking down the block, and coming back in and saying, okay, I'm home, that signifies something. And if you used to commute every day, you had that period of time that was transitional. That was where maybe you started out doing a little work, you checked some emails, but then you started reading the paper, or maybe you talked to someone on the train. But it was something to help sort of transition your mind that you were changing course. Now, a lot of times we don't have that. So make it, have something, even if it's artificial. I loved what Lisa said about the dog walking. I too, during COVID, started walking with my neighbor at 6:15. If either one of us, if we're both home, we go for a quick walk, we vent, we get everything out in the open, we walk around the neighborhood, come back and I go back to work, go back making dinner, whatever it is that you need to do. And that has really helped me because there is an element also of social isolation with working from home. And so if you are missing out on some of the social connections that you used to get from work, make them up while you're at home, whether it's meeting someone for lunch, whether it's taking a little break and, walking your dog so that you can have that social interaction. Again, that's going to make you better at concentrating and getting the things that you need to get done when you get back into your house. The other thing that I've noticed is a very good best practice is to, where you can, 80-20 it. A lot of, perfection can be our worst enemy. And sometimes it's just really helpful to just say, you know what, I'm going to give it my best shot, but at some point I have to move on. And I think that's also another really helpful hint. And then the other thing that I would bring up is what I call a social contract. Being really open with, if you're working on a project with somebody or a bunch of people, being very open about when you're available and when you're not available. And if everyone's really open about it, then everyone can make it work for each other. And it's a team sport. It works really well when you're working globally and there's no stigma or anything. If you're like, well, I can't do midnight. Well, of course you can't do midnight, but it should be the same thing with if you're working on a project with people if you've got a soccer game or you've got something that you're doing, and obviously if something is urgent or something has to be done, all bets are off. And I understand that you want to be, you have to be mindful of that. But where you can control it, going back to the point that I made earlier, really important to just get it all out on the table. And then you end up being one of the winners in it because you've gotten some flexibility and you've controlled your schedule.
So I've found, particularly since now both my husband and I are both working it remotely, depending upon the size of your home, it's also important to create spaces in your house that are not workspaces, so that you don't drag your computer into every room of your house. You designate 1 or 2 spaces if your house is large enough and says, these are non-work spaces. These are family spaces. These are downtime spaces. And you kind of will look at a family member if they bring their work into that room at that time. If you're not in a space that's large enough to designate separate rooms that way, I've talked to people who designate times of the day so from 6 to 8 p.m. Because as we work remotely, we all now are still working at 8, 9, 10 because we can. But they'll say from 6 to 8 p.m. is a non-work time in this household. And it worked well for people who lived in smaller spaces, in apartments, to create that separation during a time frame when they said, this is about family, this is about personal health, this is not a work time of the day. So that's a way to also address this issue if you're working more remotely. This also always comes out on vacation. So when is it okay to truly be out of the office on vacation? Now, I know, and I'll tell my experience, and then I'd really love to hear what you guys think. I know when I go on vacation, I set a time that my clients may call me from. So I will say from 8 to 11 a.m., you may call me, you may email me, you may text me, you may contact me in whatever format you'd like, and I will respond. But after 11 a.m., I'm not going to respond till the next day. And so I'm making it very clear what they can expect from me on vacation so that they don't have anxiety, if they know what the story is for that vacation period. How do both of you think people should address that? Because it's so easy to work anywhere and have your work overlap on your vacation.
Yes. And I have failed miserably at taking vacation at different points in my life. And so I implore everyone to do what you can to control that vacation, because you're the only one that loses out. Kind of Joan's point about the investment in time. That is precious time. And there is so much research talking about how relaxation and restoration is, again, key to your productivity. It's going to help you. And if you spend the whole time checking emails, you didn't get that relaxation. You don't get the benefit of that vacation. You don't get the time, if you happen to travel with somebody else, of spending time with that person or group of people. But I do, look, things come up. There are times where it's uncontrollable. You go on a vacation and maybe you're working on an M&A deal and the deal's gonna sign. That you're gonna need a do-over. There's no question about that. But where you can, doing what Lisa suggested, which is having some control. And what I typically do is I do check my emails once a day. I can't not, but I try really hard not to keep checking it all day long because that is my downfall. And I know that. And the other thing is having delegates. Even if that delegate cannot handle the really tough stuff, because you need to do that, at least having one person that is funneling all the things that are happening, so you're only talking to that person, is better than having a free-for-all of everybody trying to contact you. So thinking about how you can have delegates, how you can delegate work, and then also being just communicative with clients ahead of time so they know you're going on vacation. I love, some people have some great email signature lines that talk about when they're going to be taking their vacation. So they let you know ahead of time. You see it every time they send you an email and you're like, jealous. They're going on vacation. But it is good because it gets you thinking like, okay, so I don't want to bother that person while they're on vacation. So I'm going to be mindful of that. I'm going to make sure I touch base with them before or after. So those are just some tips and tricks.
Let me just build on that. I think it's great. And I love your point about having delegates, because that's not only good for you, the person on vacation. It's great to, it's a great developmental opportunity for the delegates, you know, because they get to be the hero, they get to grow, they get to say, what would Erica do in this situation? You know, so it's a great opportunity for them. But I think you also have to pay attention to what the organizational culture is, you know, and what the expectations are. And maybe you work for an organization that really agrees with the need to unplug and have the time off. Not every organization does. So I think, you know, that's always a balance and a fine line to walk.
As we move forward, we want to look at the role that organizations and leaders can play. So what role can leaders and organizations take to promote mental health at work?
Sure. I'll jump into that. You know, I think that could be its own webinar. Nicole, maybe in the fall, we'll do something on that. But I think one thing that organizations can do, you know, certainly at minimum, make sure that your employees know that they have resources, whether it's mental health benefits through their health insurance, EAP programs, any other sources of employee counseling and support. And those are all great from a treatment perspective, but there's a difference between treatment and prevention. Now, you know, granted, people struggle with mental health issues that have nothing to do with the workplace, but according to a recent Health and Human Services survey, 84% individuals reported that workplace conditions have contributed to at least one mental health challenge in the past year. So, you know, we certainly don't want the workplace to be a contributing factor to someone's mental health. So I think this is where organizations can do something I call assess and address the stress. You know, many employers do employee engagement surveys or other kind of workplace satisfaction surveys. So make sure you're asking about those factors that contribute to stress, like, you know, poor communication, unclear expectations, lack of resources. And then make sure that you actually, you know, pay attention and implement those solutions that can improve the work environment. You know, take a page from therapists and maybe keep meetings to 45 or 50 minutes. These back-to-back meetings, especially, you know, with the advent of Zoom, are killer. Folks need a few minutes in between to, you know, think about what happened in the meeting, maybe craft an email, create an action plan, so that you're not having to do that on 8 different topics at the end of the day. If an issue hasn't been resolved in 50 minutes, chances are it's not going to be resolved in 60. So that's one. I think, really prioritize workload management, make sure that workloads are manageable and realistic. Don't overwhelm your people with endless meetings and unrealistic deadlines. Train supervisors and managers in effective communication skills. I'm not saying they have to be therapists, but they do know how to listen empathically, to know what resources are available, to partner with HR. The word partner, I think, is really key here, because we're all partners in each other's success and well-being. And then you want to close the gaps between values and practices, and this is where we have to talk about organizational culture, because as the saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And culture is informed by the values of an organization, and not just the values in a lofty mission statement, but the values in action. How do people actually show up in an organization? What gets rewarded? What gets highlighted? What is the language that is used? And so if there are any gaps in between a mission statement and the actual practice, how can you close those? I hear this a lot, like, oh yeah, we just say that in the mission statement, but no one really does that. Like, that's not going to contribute to mental health. That sends a mixed message. If you're with us today, maybe you're a senior HR professional or, a senior leader. Do you have a role in architecting the culture? What can you do, as an individual to promote an environment where your people can thrive?
Erica, what if you're trying to navigate a leader or an organization that doesn't support well-being in the workplace, that's not their culture? How do you then find your sense of well-being within that organization? What's the best practices there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And again, I'm going to go back to, I think you do have to at some point ask yourself the question, is it the right culture for you? And if you decide, yes, I think I can navigate this, then I think there are some things that you could do regardless of your level in the organization. And one is, you don't need a senior title to be a leader. You can be a leader by your actions. So you can help role model some of the behaviors that you want to see, especially when you're working in teams. The thing that I mentioned about a social contract, thing about asking people or being a delegate for someone when they go on vacation, offering to be a delegate so that they can be a delegate when you go on vacation. Finding that support network that you can count on to help you when you have a rough day, or when you feel like there isn't that emphasis on well-being that you wish that the company did have. Finding someone who you think is a role model in this space within the organization, just because that may not be the culture of the organization, there are still going to be some people who are really good at it. You could see if they would be your mentor, or just connect with them. They don't have to have an official title or relationship to you for you to say, why don't we grab a coffee or a virtual coffee if they're not in the office? And just ask them how they do it. Find out what their best practices are. That also may be able to help you. Join an affinity group. A lot of companies have all different kinds of affinity groups, but it's just a way to connect with people and a way to find a group that you can count on to help support you. And then count on your other support network that's outside of work. They're also there for you.
Before we open it up to the Q&A, we'd like to ask everyone to take a minute and think about one commitment you're willing to make to promote good mental health for your organization, for your team, or for yourself. And please put that in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And I encourage everybody to think on that question and add it to the chat. And also, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A. We're going to get to as many as we can. And I've been taking furious notes as you guys have been talking, because I really like some of the reframing. I think especially around this idea of work-life balance that we hear, and that can sort of become this catchphrase that has no meaning. And so I personally am always looking for like a substantive thing that can actually help me in the workplace and help other people on the call. So this idea of work-life integration, I think, is a really good takeaway concept. And actually, a lot of what I heard is this idea of, sort of building guardrails. Like, what are the guardrails that I can operate within in work to protect myself? Is that blocking time on my calendar in advance? Is that being open and communicative about my availability? Like simple things like that's an actual tweak I can do. Maybe after this call, I'm going to go into my work Outlook and say, I know I'm going to be out these times. I'm going to put the out of office up now. So when people are looking for my availability, they know it. So that's really helpful. So I want to thank you for giving some really helpful practical tips for us today. Some of the questions that I want to get into. First, I'm curious a little bit about sort of the science of what's happening when I'm experiencing stress. So, Joan, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the body and the brain when we're stressed.
Sure, sure. That's a great question. I just want to go back to something you said about the guardrails and, the boundaries. One thing I'll often recommend my clients do, my coaching clients, is to block off thought time with Erica, on your calendar, because otherwise we don't have time to think. We're so busy transacting during the day. And just like, even if it's 30 minutes to, think about, a thorny problem, you need that time. So, okay, back to your question, Nicole. Yeah, I mean, once again, we're Cornellians. Of course, we know what it's like to be stressed. We could write a dissertation on anxiety and how we react to these pressures. We've all been there. The difficulty concentrating, the frustration, the restlessness, the irritability. Your heart pounding, headaches, muscle tension, stomachs churning. Sidebar. Does anyone remember the painting that hung in the stairwell in Willard Straight Hall going down to Oakenshields? It was this giant painting of a rope tied up in a knot. And I always thought someone had a really sick sense of humor.
Oh my gosh.
Because it was such a reflection of my internal state frequently at Cornell. Like, I don't need someone to mirror back that my stomach is in knots. It's in knots. But I also want to talk about, like, not just what goes on in our bodies, but what goes on in our brains when we get stressed. Back in the day, I don't know if it's still offered, Cornell had a class, Computing for Poets or Computers for Poets. It was in the engineering school. So this is going to be my 2-minute class on neuroscience for poets. So normally on a good day, we operate from an area of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And if we use this little model of the brain here, brainstem, cortex, the prefrontal cortex roughly corresponds to this knuckle area, and it's responsible for planning, decision making, judgment, time management, goal setting, creativity. And not surprisingly, we call this the executive functioning part of the brain. That's an actual term. But when we're stressed, a different part of the brain takes over, the limbic system, and it's located more in the internal portion of the brain, a more primitive part of the brain. And this part of the brain is all about survival. So this is where our fight or flight response is located and gets activated. Or if maybe you've had the experience of your boss asking you a question in a meeting and you didn't know the answer to it, and you just like, you had that like panic, deer in the headlights. That's a freeze response. So, fight, flight, freeze, that's all normal physiology. Now, when this stress gets triggered, when anxiety kicks in, when the limbic system kicks in, it's almost like we flip our lids. The good prefrontal cortex goes offline, and it's all about survival. So I wish I could take credit for this little model. A shout out to Dan Siegel at UCLA. He uses it with kids. I use it for everyone because I just think it's so helpful. So the trick here is not that you're not going to get triggered. We all get triggered, but how quickly can you get your good executive functioning back online? And I can talk about a couple of those things if we have time.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about, what are some things that you can do to keep your executive functioning in check, particularly because as I was looking in the chat and through some of the questions, a theme that comes up is, we're not all in these sort of hunky-dory butterfly and rainbow workplaces, right? Like there are toxic work cultures. There are toxic workplaces that we are navigating and we can't always leave them, right? Like we might not be in a position to leave a bad workplace. So obviously that lid might be flipping a lot, or we might feel in crisis a lot. So how do we actually keep our executive function in check? How do we protect ourselves? And I'd love to hear, Joan, and then Erica, if you have some best practices on that as well.
Sure. I think one very readily available tool we can use is as simple as breathing. Even for just a few minutes, it can really help activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is like pumping the brakes. It promotes relaxation, reduces stress. One thing you can do is called box breathing, where you breathe in to the count of 4, you pause for the count of 4, you breathe out for the count of 4, and then pause for the count of 4. So you can have this image of a box and just do that for a couple of minutes. I'll do it in between clients. I'll do it in between calls. It's a really nice reset. Once again, Mom, thank you. Count to 10. Sometimes you just want to slow things down, pause, take a beat, take a measure, shift from that automatic reaction to a more thoughtful response. I am a huge fan of meditation. When my therapist first recommended it in my 20s, if only I had listened to her. But I knew everything when I was in my 20s. But then I learned. And there are so many tools that are available: Calm, Headspace, visualize your happy place, or a happy face, a happy smile. If you need to energize, take a walk around the block, do some stairs, get the endorphins going. And then, healthy distraction with the emphasis on healthy. Talk to a colleague, play some music, do a quick puzzle. Just make sure you're not relying on unhealthy substances or doom scrolling on social. That's not going to help you. And when all else fails, try to lean into something called radical acceptance, which is taking life on life's terms. And I think the pandemic was a real masterclass in the need for radical acceptance. No one wanted to be locked down. No one wanted to be cut off from friends and family. But we had to say, this is where we are, and we have to be resilient.
That's great. And I'm really glad that you brought up the breathing, and I want to just do a shout out. Someone in the chat flagged that their son watches something called Daniel Tiger, and there's a song when you're getting mad and you want to roar, take a deep breath and count to 4. I'm definitely going to adopt that and start using that. So thank you for sharing that in the chat.
Nicole, can I add one thing? When you're in a toxic environment, but you can't leave for whatever reason, what it really, and Joan, it really impacts your sense of self-worth in a huge way. And I think because you're not getting that sense of value in that environment, and the environment's not going to allow you to get that sense of value because it is a toxic environment. And so I think it's important to go to other areas in your life, whether it be friend systems or any sport you might do. You might want to play a round of golf where you feel you'll be successful, and you reclaim your sense of self-worth through external activities. And that's really important, because that loss of self-worth in your job setting can spiral downward in a lot of ways. And so Erica and And Joan, if you have any,
I was actually going to say something very similar. I think I was going to describe it as a lack of confidence, right? It really eats away at your confidence. And then that eats away at the rest of, you can, if you let it, get into other parts of your life. And you don't want that to happen. So you have to figure out ways to boost your confidence in other areas outside of work. And really focus on when you're saying, okay, I'm done for the day. Now I'm going to go enjoy this. Whatever this is, could be maybe you love cooking. Maybe, exercise for me is always my release. That's just me. Everyone has a different thing. Maybe it's gardening. Maybe it's, just spending time with family or friends. It could be anything. But it's that you go and you do that and you live in the present, like Joan mentioned earlier, because if you are just swirling, and thinking about all the things that were going on, that little bit of time that you have, you're not going to be able to enjoy yourself in that moment either. And then again, this is where it spirals and just becomes kind of 24/7 for you.
And even in, more toxic workplaces, chances are there'll be a few bright lights. There will be a few people who, are intelligent and thoughtful and healthy. So as I like to say, go where the love is, build those relationships with those people. And it's really important, apropos what you said about confidence. When you're in those environments, you often feel like you're looking at a funhouse mirror, where all of a sudden you're like, somehow sportage or, stretched out or, short and squat. But you want to find some realistic mirrors, some people who really get you and see you and reflect back to you, the whole intelligent, capable person that you are.
This is really helpful. And one of the things I had written down when you guys were all chatting was, how much space am I going to give to this thing, this stress, this, how much space am I going to allow it to take up? And I'm hopeful to walk away from the session and say, when there are work things, when there are personal things that I can't escape, how much mental energy am I going to give it? How much, am I going to let it sit with me? One of the things that
One other thing about this,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's actually something that's helped me in the past and with conversations that I've had with other people in similar situations. So I think we all can, maybe not all, and unfortunately, people have touched upon toxic work environments at different times in their lives. And one thing that actually I found really, really helpful is actually facing the biggest fear that you have. So if the biggest fear you have is getting fired, which, I do not take that lightly at all. Think it through, like, okay, so let's now make that, what are the steps you're going to take? How are you going to manage that? Work through that fear. And that, I think, is a really helpful exercise. It's scary, it's hard, but it actually then just grounds you. So like, okay, if that's your biggest fear, and now you have a plan, you know exactly what you're going to do, that may help a little bit. It's not going to change anything, but it may just help you a little bit as you work through it.
That's true. Coming up with what is the worst case scenario for me right now, and then I can have a little bit more sense of control because I've thought through what will happen if that happens to me. So a lot of stuff has come in, and we can't take all the questions, but one of the things that it's been a recurring theme is this idea of, as I'm talking about mental health matters, how vulnerable do I get? How much do I disclose? Whether I'm an employee, a manager, the head of the company, are there variants of disclosure, variants of vulnerability? I'd love to hear about that.
I'd love to share, because that's such a great question. Thank you. Modeling vulnerability is very humanizing. If you're a leader, it makes you very relatable. It helps create a space where then other people can also be vulnerable and share their struggles. So I think it is okay to share within reason. We don't have to, like totally put it all out there, but it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help. If you're a leader, you're not perfect, but trust me, your team already knows that. But here's where I think there's a lot of beauty in vulnerability, because it also then gives you an opportunity to talk about what you're doing to move beyond it. And you get to model resilience. And again, you know, the pandemic was a master class in modeling resilience. You know, as a leader, how have you met, or how are you meeting those challenges? You know, what are you doing to cope? Did you reach out to HR, to an EAP, maybe a therapist? Did you start meditating? How have you mastered something and worked it through? So it's not just about vulnerability, but when you get to pair it with resilience, it's a really lovely lesson in learning.
Erica, Lisa, do you want to add anything on that sort of degrees of vulnerability in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really strong leadership trait. I think if you think about different leaders and role models of leaders, the ones that are more vulnerable are, at least for me, I find to be so much more real, and leaders that I would want to be led by, if you will.
I think it's also important to identify who you can be vulnerable to, because there are people in the workplace that will be very receptive, that will not, will either help mentor you, even if they're, below or above you. And then there are people in that workplace that aren't going to be supportive of vulnerability. And I think, we all have to use our abilities to judge a situation and determine who are the people that it would be okay to drop your guard and show that side of yourself to in the organization. And it's important to find those people, not just for vulnerability, but because those are also down the road going to be the people who are going to be your cheerleaders in the organization too. And that's really important to find.
That's really helpful. That sort of discretion, right? And being mindful
Exactly.
of what's happening in your workplace, and saying, who can I be upfront with? And that sort of leads to the next question. I want to talk a little bit about pulling in a question from the registration and a question that we got in the chat about how do we actually have a conversation with a manager about mental health affecting our work performance, especially if we have people in those leadership positions who don't support mental health matters.
Yeah. I can jump in on that. I think before you talk to your manager or your supervisor, maybe do a little self-reflection on the nature of the issue. So is this something, short term? Is it a loss or a breakup? Is it something that, you just need some assistance with in the moment? Is this something that's more chronic? Is this, more of a major depression or a bipolar disorder? Are you caring for an ill family member? What is it that you think you need? Do you need some time off, some reduced hours, a little more work from home flexibility? Maybe you just need an hour or two off during the work week to seek a therapist, to see a therapist. So just, give a little thought as to what's going on, what you think you need. And then maybe before you sit down with your boss, maybe have a conversation with HR. So, because they can advise you on resources that are available, what you might be entitled to. Maybe you need something, maybe you need some kind of an accommodation, maybe some time off through Family Medical Leave Act, and once you know what your options are, then you can talk to your supervisor. And you don't need to share your diagnosis. They don't need to know everything, nor can they ask you about your diagnosis. But if you say that it's affecting your work performance, they already know that you're struggling. And I think this gives you a lot of credibility in saying, I'm taking ownership for this. I'm trying to be accountable. I'm trying to do the right thing, and I want to work with you on this. But, so between HR and your manager, you can come up with a plan as to, what you need and what would be helpful for you and what works within the organization.
That's incredibly helpful. I love the idea of structuring the conversation. Don't just come in sort of with word vomit, and unleash all of your, personal, professional matters and try to jam that into a 15-minute call. Sit with yourself, figure out what you actually want to say, structure it, and identify the need. I think that's incredibly helpful. Because I imagine that there are managers on the receiving end who might say, well, this person is going to ask for 6 months of leave because they have, this mental health issue. Maybe really what they're asking for and what they need is an hour a week to go to a therapy session. And so sort of managing their expectations and getting ahead of that, I think, is incredibly valuable. And just to sort of to close the loop, I want to flip it and let's look at now, if you're the manager on the receiving end of that question, and you have to sort of address in real time what's happening, how do you sort of navigate that? And particularly if the broader workplace culture is not super supportive of mental health.
Erica, did you want to say something
Yeah, I
about?
mean, whether if you are actually a leader or a manager of a team and somebody's coming to you, I don't think you necessarily, I don't think it matters what the culture is, right? You're being a manager. And one of the things that a manager needs to do or a leader needs to lead with empathy, and you should. And I have had many people come and have hard things happen, right? Life happens. And, you need to be empathetic about it. You need to listen. You may not have the answers, but you need to show support. And that has always been the way that I have managed it. Even today, I had somebody had a work emergency that they need some time off for, where the whole team is now working around it to make sure that that she doesn't have to worry at all. And that's, that's just, I see that as the role of a manager. But I know that maybe it's not as simple as how I'm describing it. But I do think as a manager, if you do have that opportunity, just listen and have some empathy, because life happens. And I know we all have these, we get caught up in the work deadlines and all of that, but you have to take a step back sometimes and just say, like, we have to think about the whole person. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to do good work. And it doesn't mean that that person's not going to be productive, but just life happens and we need to support each other.
Exactly. And those wise words, life happens, is how we're going to close out. I want to thank you all, Lisa, Joan, Erica, for this informative session. And I want to thank all the attendees for joining today and for your engagement. I saw so much positive connection in the webinar chat and alumni helping alumni. I really, really appreciate that. If you have any follow-up questions for our panelists, you can connect with them via LinkedIn. We're going to add their profiles to the chat. And you're soon going to receive a follow-up email with the recording of today's session and a survey. I encourage you to share your feedback to help the ILR Alumni Association and Cornell alumni programs to ensure that we're providing helpful tools and resources to navigate your career transition. As I noted at the outset, we're continuing our collaboration with valuable webinars in the fall, so please send us a message with what kind of content you're looking to see. Thank you again for attending, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Bye.